Welcome to the deep dive. Today we have a custom episode tailored specifically for you, the learner. And I really want to start by painting a picture that I am willing to bet is going to feel, well, uncomfortably familiar.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
Yeah, so picture this. You sit down at your desk. You have a massive, really important project due. Maybe it's presentation that could make or break your quarter. Or, maybe it's that novel you've been swearing you're going to write forever.
Right.
Or maybe you just need to study for a certification that actually matters for your life goals. And you've done all the prep work, right? You've blocked out the time on your calendar. You've got your perfectly brewed cup of coffee sitting right next to your keyboard.
The perfect setup.
Exactly. You are finally ready to conquer the world. But right before you type that very first sentence, a little voice in the back of your head whispers, I'm just going to check my phone for 2 minutes.
Just 2 minutes.
Just to clear my notifications so I'm not distracted while I work.
It is, without a doubt, the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves on a daily basis.
It really is because, we all know what happens next. You open an app, you start swiping, you watch one short video, which leads to another, and suddenly you blink, and an entire hour has completely vanished.
Just gone.
Gone. You haven't written a single word, you haven't completed a single task, and the worst part isn't even the lost time.
No, it's the feeling afterward.
Right. The worst part is that instead of feeling rested from that little break, you feel completely drained. You feel restless, slightly anxious, and entirely unmotivated to start the hard work you actually sat down to do in the first place.
It's a very specific kind of exhaustion.
Yeah. So if you, the learner, are nodding your head right now, or maybe even listening to this while actively avoiding a task yourself, you are in exactly the right place. Because the biggest challenge you face today isn't a lack of time, it is a lack of focus.
I would actually argue it is the defining psychological struggle of the modern era. We're living in an environment that is meticulously engineered to pull our attention in 1,000 different directions at once.
Yeah, engineered is the right word.
Absolutely. Social media platforms, endless short-form videos, push notifications, digital entertainment, they're all locked in a constant, relentless, multi-billion-dollar competition for your time and your mental energy. And frankly, our ancient brains are just outmatched.
That is exactly what we are unpacking today. Our mission is to figure out why our focus seems to be dying, and more importantly, how a concept called the dopamine detox can actually help you reset your brain's reward system.
It's a fascinating mechanism.
It is, and we've gathered an incredible stack of sources for this.
Right.
We're pulling from heavy medical literature on neurobiology, behavioral science wikis, psychology blogs, and some brilliant insights from leading thinkers like Dr. Cameron Sipa, James Clear, and Dr. Andrew Huberman.
A very solid foundation.
Yeah, we're going to look at why we procrastinate so much, why we lose our drive, and how we can actually train our brains to do hard things again.
Before we dive into the heavy neuroscience here, I think it's vital to offer a moment of validation.
Please do.
If you find yourself struggling to concentrate, or if you notice your hand instinctively reaching for your phone the absolute millisecond you feel a hint of boredom, say, standing in line at the grocery store or waiting for a red light to change, you need to know that this is not a moral failing.
Yeah.
It is not sheer laziness. What you are experiencing is a highly predictable, incredibly potent neurochemical reaction to an environment that has been artificially built to overstimulate you.
It's biological.
Entirely. Your brain is reacting exactly the way it was evolutionarily programmed to react. The fundamental issue is that our environment has changed at warp speed over the last 20 years, and our biological hardware is still operating on prehistoric settings.
I really love that framing. It takes the guilt out of it so we can actually look at the mechanics of what's happening. Let's start with the root of all of this, which means we need to talk about dopamine.
We do.
Because pop culture has done a real number on how we understand this chemical. You see it on t-shirts, you see it in memes. The general consensus out there is that dopamine is the pleasure chemical.
Right, the happiness molecule.
Yeah, exactly. Like you eat a slice of chocolate cake, your brain squirts out some dopamine, and you feel happy. But going through the medical literature in our stack, that seems to be a massive oversimplification, if not completely backwards.
It is perhaps the most persistent myth in popular science today. Pharmacologically speaking, the current scientific consensus is that dopamine does not primarily cause the feeling of pleasure.
Oh, okay, so what does it do?
Instead, it confers what neuroscientists call motivational salience. To translate that from the academic jargon, dopamine is the chemical of anticipation, is the chemical of craving,
Anticipation, not the reward itself.
Exactly. It signals the perceived prominence or the desirability of a future outcome. It's the fuel that propels your behavior toward achieving a goal, or conversely, away from a negative outcome. Dr. Anna Lemke, who's a professor of psychiatry at Stanford, whose work is heavily referenced in our sources, phrases it beautifully.
What'd you say?
She says, dopamine is about wanting, not about having.
Wanting, not having. Wow, that completely shifts how you have to look at your own behavior. The sources break this down into a neuropsychological framework called the incentive salience model.
Yes, that's a crucial model to understand.
I was reading through this, and it separates the concept of wanting, which is the approach behavior, the drive that gets you off the couch, from liking, which is the actual consummatory behavior, the physical pleasure you feel when you finally get the thing.
The animal studies illustrating this are absolutely fascinating. There's a classic experiment detailed in the literature involving monkeys and fruit juice.
Oh, I read about this one. Break it down for us.
So researchers hooked up monitors to a monkey's brain to track its neurochemistry in real time. They trained the monkey to understand that when a specific light turned on in the cage, a few seconds later, a drop of sweet juice would be delivered.
So logically, if dopamine is the pleasure chemical like pop culture says, it should spike when the monkey actually tastes the sweet juice.
Right. Exactly. That was the initial assumption. But that's not what happened at all. The monitors showed that the moment the light turned on, the cue that predicted the reward, the monkey's eyes widened, its focus narrowed, and its dopamine levels absolutely surged.
Just from the light?
Just from the light.
Yeah.
That massive spike in dopamine was driving the anticipation, the intense motivation to get ready for the juice. But once the monkey actually received the juice and started drinking it, the dopamine levels plummeted back down.
Wow.
At the moment of consumption, another neurotransmitter, primarily serotonin, increased as the monkey felt satisfied and experienced the actual pleasure of the meal. The dopamine was just the engine that got the monkey to care about the juice in the first place.
I found another concept in the research that blew my mind even more, and it builds right on that monkey experiment. It's called the reward prediction error hypothesis.
Yes, proposed by researchers Montague, Diane, and Sadnowski. It is a brilliant mechanism.
Right. So the way I understood it is that your brain is constantly running this subconscious algorithm, trying to guess what rewards are coming your way based on your environment.
Constantly predicting.
Yeah. And if you expect a specific reward and you get exactly what you expected, your dopamine just maintains a steady, boring baseline. It says, okay, nothing new to learn here.
The status quo.
But if you get an unexpected reward, or a reward that is significantly bigger than you anticipated, your brain produces a massive, short-lasting spike in synaptic dopamine.
That prediction error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's basically your brain's alarm system yelling, whoa, pay attention to exactly what you just did, remember the steps you took, and do it again.
And we have to look at the flip side of that equation too, because it's just as powerful. If you expect a reward and it is omitted, let's say you put $1 in a vending machine, you press the button and nothing comes out, your dopamine levels actually drop below your normal background baseline.
Oh, so you actually feel worse than before you tried.
Yes, you feel a sudden deficit of physiological emptiness. And ironically, that drop drives you to try again, to hit the machine, to chase the reward, just to get your brain chemistry back to normal.
That is wild.
This specific mechanism is so fundamentally tied to how biological organisms learn that computer scientists have actually lifted this exact framework of prediction error to develop modern machine learning and AI algorithms. It is the ultimate teaching signal.
Let's bring this right back to you, the learner. Think about your own daily habits with this new lens. Think about why you relentlessly pull down to refresh your Instagram feed, or why you open your email inbox 20 times an hour even when you're supposed to be relaxing.
It's the same mechanism.
It is not, because the content of those emails or videos is deeply, soul-enrichingly satisfying. Honestly, 99% of the time, the updates are completely mundane. You are being driven by the anticipation. The what if.
The slot machine effect.
Right. What if there's an urgent message from the boss? What if there's a hilarious video that perfectly matches my humor? What if someone liked my photo? That uncertainty, that unexpected potential reward, is creating a dopamine surge that makes you want to approach the phone. You are endlessly chasing the anticipation, but you're rarely actually satisfied.
When you zoom out and look at human history, you can clearly see why this system was brilliant for our survival. For our ancient ancestors wandering the savannah, this relentless dopamine drive was the only thing keeping them alive.
Got them out of the cave.
Exactly. It motivated them to leave the safety of the cave, to forage, to hunt, to explore unknown territories, to solve complex problems, and to reproduce. In a prehistoric environment, dopamine was released when you discovered a new berry patch or completed a grueling physical task. It was a reward for effort.
But today,
But today, in the modern era, that exact same evolutionary hardware is being systematically hijacked.
which brings us to the core of the distraction problem, the modern digital environment and the concept of compulsion loops. We don't live on the savannah anymore. Our world is literally overflowing with stimuli that trigger rapid, effortless dopamine release.
Everywhere you look.
Notifications, auto-playing videos on TikTok, online shopping with one-click purchasing hyper-palatable junk food delivered right to your door. You don't have to hunt or forage or expend any physical energy. You just have to tap a smooth piece of glass.
Zero friction.
And the behavioral science behind how these digital platforms are built is incredibly deliberate. The sources point out that this is deeply rooted in operant conditioning.
It all goes back to B.F. Skinner. Most people learn about Skinner boxes in Psychology 101.
The rat in the box.
Right. Skinner would put a rat or a pigeon in a box with a lever. When the animal pressed the lever, a food pellet would drop out. As soon as the reward was fixed, one press equals one pellet.
Simple enough.
Very simple. The animals learned this quickly, but they only pressed the lever when they were actively hungry. But then, Skinner changed the rules. He introduced what is called a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement.
Meaning he made it random?
Precisely. Sometimes the rat would press the lever and get nothing. Sometimes it would get one pellet. Sometimes it would hit the jackpot and get 5 pellets.
So they never knew it was coming.
The animal could never predict when the reward was coming, only that it might come if it kept pressing. When Skinner introduced this randomness, the animal's behavior changed drastically. They became obsessed. They would press the lever continuously, frantically, even when they weren't hungry, just chasing the unpredictable reward.
And that is the exact psychological mechanism that powers the compulsion loop, which our sources note is a concept deliberately used in video game design and digital media architecture.
It's the blueprint.
A compulsion loop generally has 3 distinct phases: the anticipation of the reward, the activity or action you must complete to get it, and the act of obtaining the reward itself. Video games are absolute masterclasses in engineering this.
They really are. The gaming industry understands dopamine better than almost anyone.
The stack highlights a few specific examples that make this so clear. Take a wildly popular game series like Monster Hunter.
Oh, perfect example.
If you've never played it, the core loop is incredibly tight and transparent. You use your current armor and weapons to go out and hunt a giant monster. That's the activity.
Okay.
When you defeat the monster, it drops random pieces of loot, horns, scales, claws. That's the variable ratio schedule. You never know if you're going to get the ultra-rare scale you need. You then take that random loot back to town to craft slightly better gear, which allows you to go out and fight even harder monsters to get even rarer loot.
It is a perpetual, beautifully designed engine of anticipation and reward.
And the sources also mention a newer game, Cult of the Lamb, which is brilliant because it actually feeds 2 compulsion loops into each other.
A dual loop system, how does that one work?
So you essentially have an action phase and a management phase. You do a fast-paced hack and slash run through a dungeon to gather random resources. That's loop 1. Then you bring those resources back to a home base to build up a little settlement of followers.
Oh, I see.
Upgrading your settlement unlocks better weapons and abilities, which you then use to go back into the dungeon to get better resources. You are constantly bouncing between 2 different dopamine engines, meaning the moment one starts to feel slightly repetitive, the other kicks in to refresh your anticipation.
And we see the most extreme, transparent version of this with the phenomenon of loot boxes in modern gaming. Players either earn through gameplay or literally spend real money to buy a digital box that contains a random assortment of virtual items.
Literal gambling.
Essentially, yes. The psychological uncertainty of what might be inside causes dopamine production to spike at much higher rates than if the player just bought the specific item they wanted directly. And the designers add incredibly stimulating visual and audio effects. Glowing lights, shaking animations, triumphant sounds.
To heighten the anticipation.
Exactly, to heighten that excitement as the box opens. It perfectly, unapologetically mimics a casino slot machine.
But it's vital to realize it isn't just video games. The smartphone sitting in your pocket right now is the ultimate compulsion loop device. One of the authors in our stack makes a really chilling analogy. They point out that in the history of medicine, the invention of the hypodermic needle revolutionized the delivery of drugs.
Right, it bypassed the digestive system.
Yeah, it injected substances directly into the bloodstream, making them vastly faster and more potent. The author argues that the smartphone is the hypodermic needle for digital dopamine. Every single vibration against your leg, every bright red notification badge on an app icon is a micro hit delivered straight to your brain's reward center.
And this leads to the physiological consequence of all this engineering, which is dopamine desensitization. The brain is highly adaptive. It seeks homeostasis or balance.
Right.
When your brain is constantly flooded with unnaturally high levels of dopamine from these effortless digital triggers, it realizes it's being overwhelmed. To protect itself, it essentially turns down the volume. It reduces the number of active dopamine receptors. You build a biological tolerance.
So just like a caffeine addict who used to get jittery off 1 cup of coffee now needs 4 cups just to feel awake, we start needing more intense, more frequent digital stimuli just to feel a normal baseline level of satisfaction.
Exactly. And the tragic everyday side effect of that desensitization is that the normal, slow-paced activities of human life begin to feel unbearably, painfully boring. Reading a physical book where the text doesn't move or flash, sitting down to study a complex subject,
Just having a quiet conversation.
yes, or working on a long-term project with delayed rewards. These activities simply cannot compete with the hyperstimulating algorithmic feeds. Your focus is dying because your brain is exhausted from being constantly overstimulated. It craves the fast, easy rewards it has grown accustomed to, and it literally lacks the neurochemical motivation to engage in deep, challenging work.
It's a profound shift in human behavior across an entire generation, and it's incredibly telling that the tech giants who design these very systems are acutely aware of their potency.
Oh, they definitely are.
The sources bring up a really famous anecdote about Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple, the man who arguably brought the smartphone and the tablet to the masses. When asked by a reporter what his kids thought of the newly released iPad, Jobs revealed that he strictly prohibited his own children from using iPads and smartphones at home.
That says everything you need to know.
He and other Silicon Valley executives actively send their kids to tech-free schools. They understand on a fundamental level that these devices wire the developing brain for super-fast feedback, destroying the ability to think long-term or tolerate boredom.
The irony is stark. The architects of the attention economy restrict their own families from consuming their products.
Here is where it gets incredibly visceral, though. We've talked about the psychology and the gamification, but it is also an exploitation of our physical, hardwired reflexes. Let's look at the actual neuroscience of notifications. Why is it so incredibly difficult, almost physically painful, to ignore your phone when it pings from across the room?
Right. Why can't we just ignore it?
Our sources explain this through a biological phenomenon called the orienting response.
The orienting response is a deeply ingrained neurological mechanism designed for survival. Going back to our evolutionary past, if you were a hunter-gatherer focusing on picking berries and you suddenly heard a sharp rustle in the tall grass behind you, you needed to snap your attention to that sound immediately.
Because it could be a tiger.
Exactly. It could be a predator about to attack, or it could be prey you need to hunt. Your survival entirely depended on that instantaneous, involuntary attentional shift toward novel stimuli. Today, app developers and notification designers exploit that exact same biological pathway.
I was reading the timeline on this in the stack, and it's terrifyingly fast. When your phone pings or when the screen suddenly lights up in your peripheral vision, brain regions like the superior colliculus and the posterior parietal cortex react in roughly 100 to 200 milliseconds.
Faster than conscious thought.
Literally faster than conscious thought. Before your logical, rational prefrontal cortex can even process what is happening and say, oh, it's just an email, I can ignore it, your biological reflexes have already forcibly directed your physical attention to the screen.
It's a hostile takeover of your senses. And it's interesting, the authors of some of the sociological papers in our stack frame this in a really stark, critical way. They actually call this intentional corporate design neurological colonization, which is a heavy term.
Neurological colonization.
The argument is that tech companies are essentially colonizing our biological reflexes for profit.
Yeah, the sources dive pretty deep into the social implications of this. Now, I just want to be super clear here to our listeners. We aren't taking a political side or endorsing the specific viewpoint, but we are imparting the exact framework provided in the source text because it shows how deeply debated this topic is.
Exactly. We're just reporting the literature.
Right. So from a leftist perspective, detailed in the sources, they argue this acts as a form of structural ableism.
Structural ableism.
Yes, the idea there is that these notification-heavy constant interruption systems are optimized to exploit neurotypical attention patterns, but they are fundamentally incompatible with the cognitive architecture of neurodivergent individuals, like those with ADHD.
That makes a lot of sense.
It creates an environment where people with executive function challenges are constantly penalized by the very tools they are required to use for school or work. We don't need to dive too deep into the politics of it, but it just shows how seriously the behavioral science community is viewing the real-world impact of these designs.
And that impact is most severe in young people. The sources point out the acute vulnerability of adolescence. In the teenage brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and overriding bad habits, is still heavily under construction.
Still developing.
Yes. Meanwhile, the nucleus accumbens, the core of the brain's reward center, is at its absolute peak sensitivity. It creates a neurological perfect storm for behavioral manipulation. They feel the dopamine pull stronger than adults, but lack the biological brakes to stop themselves.
So whether you look at it through the lens of evolutionary biology, social impact, or adolescent development, the physical reality is that we are living in a state of constant interruption. And this brings us to a really common defense mechanism people use, the myth of multitasking.
Multitasking.
Because I hear this all the time, and I'm totally guilty of it too. We think, oh, I can answer this Slack message, check this text, and then seamlessly go right back to writing my report. I'm a great multitasker. But researcher Clifford Nass from Stanford, who is cited heavily in our stack, completely destroys this idea.
NASA's research on chronic media multitaskers is highly illuminating and a bit depressing. He set out to prove that people who multitask constantly must have developed superior cognitive filtering abilities. He assumed they must be great at ignoring irrelevant information.
But he found the exact opposite, didn't he?
Entirely the opposite. He found that chronic media multitaskers are actually terrible at filtering out irrelevant information. Their working memory is significantly degraded compared to people who focus on one thing at a time. Furthermore, neuroscience tells us that the brain cannot actually perform two complex cognitive tasks simultaneously.
Right, it's a physical impossibility.
What it actually does is rapid task switching. Every time you shift your attention from your report to a text message, your brain has to disengage from the first task, reorient to the new task, and then reverse the process to go back.
And there's a cost to that switching, right? The sources call it attention residue.
Yes, attention residue. Every time you shift your focus, a piece of your attention remains stuck on the previous distraction. Your attention isn't beautifully divided, it is fractured and diverted. Over time, chronic multitaskers become mentally exhausted, heavily distractible, and making what Cal Newport terms deep work sustained, focused cognitive effort nearly impossible.
So if you're listening to this and feeling a sense of dread because your environment is stacked against you, your neurobiology is being systematically hijacked, and your ability to do deep work is fractured, don't panic.
Don't panic at all.
Because this raises the ultimate question: how do we reset? How do we reclaim our focus and our motivation?
That is the exact problem that the concept of the dopamine detox attempts to solve.
The term was originally popularized by Dr. Cameron Sipa, a clinical professor of psychiatry who works heavily with high-performing tech executives in Silicon Valley. He introduced it as a structured cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, technique. But before we get into the actual how-to of his protocols, we desperately need to separate fact from fiction.
Very important.
Because as soon as this term hit the internet, it was wildly misunderstood and turned into a bizarre trend.
We absolutely must clarify the medical reality here. The biggest misconception is right in the name. The goal of a dopamine detox is not to literally eliminate dopamine from your brain or your body. As we've established, dopamine is a naturally occurring, vital neurotransmitter.
You literally need it to live.
It regulates your physical movement, your learning processes, your sleep cycles, and your mood. If you were to actually fast from dopamine and eliminate it from your brain, you wouldn't become highly focused. You would develop severe, life-altering medical conditions.
Right. The sources make this crystal clear. A severe lack of dopamine is the primary driver of Parkinson's disease, which causes intense physical tremors, rigid muscles, and a loss of voluntary movement. Or, From a psychiatric perspective, you would fall into severe clinical depression and anhedonia, where you are completely incapable of feeling any joy whatsoever.
Exactly.
Your brain continues to produce dopamine 24/7 even when you're sleeping, and you absolutely need it to stay alive.
So the term dopamine detox is scientifically inaccurate. It's a catchy marketing phrase,
Mm-hmm.
but it is not a biological detox in the way you might detox from a heavy metal.
Mm-hmm.
What it actually is, functionally, is a behavioral fast.
A behavioral fast.
It is a structured, intentional period where you abstain from highly impulsive, hyperstimulating activities. The goal isn't to lower your baseline dopamine levels permanently. The goal is to give your brain a break so it can restore its dopamine receptor sensitivity. It's about breaking the habitual cycle of instant gratification so your brain stops demanding extreme artificial stimulation just to feel motivated to get out of bed.
Okay, so if it's a behavioral fast, what exactly are we fasting from? Dr. Sipa's CBT framework specifically targets 6 categories of impulsive behaviors. These are the behaviors that tend to trigger those unnatural, massive spikes in anticipation and reward that lead to desensitization. I want to walk through these because they are very common.
Let's break them down. Category 1 is emotional eating. This doesn't mean you stop eating food entirely. It specifically targets ultra-processed foods that are highly engineered with combinations of sugar, salt, and fat to trigger massive dopamine release. It's eating for stimulation, not for nutrition.
Category 2 is the big one for most of us, excessive internet usage and gaming. This includes social media scrolling, binge-watching Netflix, checking news feeds obsessively, and playing video games that utilize those compulsion loops we talked about.
The modern slot machines.
Yeah. Category 3 is gambling and impulsive shopping. This includes literal casinos, but also day trading cryptocurrency, betting on sports apps, or mindlessly buying things on Amazon just for the thrill of the package arriving.
Category 4 is porn and masturbation, which the literature notes provides an incredibly potent, unnatural dopamine spike due to the infinite novelty available online. Category 5 is thrill and novelty seeking.
And Category 6.
Category 6 is the use of recreational drugs, which in the context of a detox heavily includes pulling back on culturally accepted stimulants like massive amounts of caffeine and daily alcohol consumption, both of which artificially manipulate your reward circuitry.
The unifying theme across all 6 of these categories is that they provide immediate, highly potent reward with zero friction and zero real-world effort. Now, I want to connect this directly to you, the learner. When you hear the word detox or fast, it is so incredibly easy to view it as a punishment.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds miserable, it sounds like you are putting yourself in adult timeout, but the sources provide a beautiful reframe that changes everything. You shouldn't view this detox as a punishment or a deprivation of joy. You should view it as creating mental silence.
That is a crucial psychological shift.
You are intentionally clearing away the noise so your brain can remember how to hear the quiet things. You are taking a step back so you can eventually enjoy simple, lower dopamine tasks again. The goal is to get to a point where reading a physical book, creating art, working on a challenging project, or just going for a walk in the woods without a podcast playing your ear actually feels satisfying again.
Think of it like adjusting the volume on a stereo. If you are used to the volume of your life being blasted at a 10 out of 10, constantly loud music, bright screens, constant alerts, a normal conversation happening at a volume of 4 is going to seem completely inaudible. You won't even notice it.
It's just drowned out.
Exactly. By turning off the blaring stimuli for a set period of time, your ears, or in this biological case, your dopamine receptors, have time to adjust. The ringing stops. And suddenly, a few days later, a volume of 4 sounds perfectly clear, nuanced, and deeply engaging.
So how do we actually execute this volume adjustment in real life? The sources provide 3 specific frameworks for pulling off a dopamine detox, scaling from extremely intense to very approachable. There is the 48-hour complete detox, the 24-hour detox, and the partial detox.
Right, a tiered approach.
Let's start by exploring the 48-hour complete detox because it is the most intensive and sets the baseline rules.
In a 48-hour complete detox, you are attempting to remove almost all external sources of artificial stimulation for a full weekend. It requires planning and setting strict physical boundaries. The easiest way to conceptualize this is by creating a hard list of cans and can'ts.
Let's rip the Band-Aid off and look at the can'ts first. For 48 continuous hours, you cannot look at any screens. No smartphone, no laptop, no internet, no social media, no video games, no movies, no TV.
Nothing with a screen.
You cannot eat processed junk food or added sugar. You shouldn't listen to highly stimulating upbeat music. You might allow some ambient, wordless relaxation music, but no high-energy pop or heavy metal. No alcohol, no recreational drugs, and ideally a heavy reduction in caffeine.
Now, understandably, when the average modern person hears that list, their immediate visceral reaction is panic. The thought process is, what on earth am I supposed to do for 2 entire days? I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah, the anxiety spikes immediately.
That panic, that immediate anxiety at the thought of being disconnected, is the very addiction we are discussing. It is the brain fearing the absence of its normal chemical pacifier. But the detox does not mean sitting in an empty room staring at a blank wall. There is a robust, highly fulfilling list of cans.
Yes, the cans are all about low stimulation, high value, slow paced activities. You can go for long contemplative walks in nature. You can journal your thoughts, map out your goals, or write down ideas. You can meditate, practice mindfulness, or do slow stretching and yoga.
Highly grounded activities.
You can read physical books, though the sources suggest sticking to nonfiction, philosophy, or material that isn't an overly thrilling, page-turning fiction novel. You can have face-to-face, deep, meaningful conversations with friends or family. You can cook simple, healthy meals from scratch. You can clean your house, organize your workspace, or do laundry. You can even do focused offline work, like writing in a notebook or sketching, as long as it isn't constantly interrupted by a need to check the internet.
To put the perceived extremity of the 48-hour detox into perspective, the sources offer a really fascinating comparison that I think helps ground the anxiety. They compare a weekend smartphone detox to a Vipassana silent meditation retreat.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those are intense. I had a friend do one of those.
They're incredibly rigorous. A traditional Vipassana retreat lasts for 10 full days.
Right.
Participants are required to maintain complete noble silence.
No talking at all.
No talking, obviously, but also no eye contact with others and no physical gestures. They have no physical contact. They are not allowed to read books. They cannot write in journals. They obviously have no phones or access to the outside world. They meditate for upwards of 10 hours a day, just sitting in total silence, observing the internal workings of their own minds.
That sounds agonizing for the first few days.
The physical and mental toll of those first few days is immense, but participants universally emerge with a profound sense of clarity and mental stillness. When you compare putting your phone in a drawer for a Saturday and Sunday while still being able to talk to your family, read books, and cook dinner, well, suddenly, the 48-hour detox feels vastly more approachable. It's a walk in the park compared to true sensory deprivation.
That is a phenomenal reframe. Now, if 48 hours still feels impossible because of work or family obligations, there is the 24-hour detox. It operates on the exact same rules, but just for a single day, usually a Sunday. And then there is the highly practical partial detox.
A partial detox is a highly targeted surgical approach. It requires self-awareness. Let's say you analyze your screen time and realize your specific kryptonite isn't gaming or shopping, it's specifically YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels. You lose 2 hours a day to them.
Right.
A partial detox means you live your normal life, use your computer for work, text your friends, but you completely eliminate that one specific app or behavior for a set period of time, say 30 days.
Yeah.
You remove the biggest, most toxic offender from your behavioral diet without disrupting the rest of your life.
But regardless of which tier you choose, the full weekend or the partial fast phase, we have to be honest about the immediate challenges you're going to face. This is not going to feel good right away. When you stop feeding your brain these high dopamine triggers, you will experience a very real form of psychological withdrawal.
It is unavoidable. The first few hours, you will likely feel an intense, almost physical craving to check your device. You might experience the phantom buzz syndrome, where you swear you felt your phone vibrate in your pocket, even when it's in another room.
I hate that feeling.
You will likely feel a baseline thrum of anxiety. You will undoubtedly feel bored. And you may face social pressure or friction from friends or colleagues who don't understand why you aren't immediately replying to their messages.
And what our sources heavily emphasize is that leaning into that discomfort, specifically leaning into the boredom, is the actual cure. Boredom isn't a sign that the detox is failing. Boredom is the detox working.
Exactly. We have pathologized boredom in the modern world. We treat it like a disease that must be instantly cured with a screen. But boredom is a natural biological signal. It is the brain's way of prompting you to seek out meaningful engagement.
When you embrace that lack of stimulation, when you force yourself to sit with the restlessness instead of escaping it through a screen, your brain realizes that the cheap dopamine hits are gone. It stops waiting for the slot machine to pay out. The desensitization starts to reverse.
That's the reset.
And the result, according to practitioners, is almost magical. After a period of fasting, your baseline lowers. Suddenly, sitting down to tackle that hard project or reading a complex textbook doesn't feel like cognitive torture anymore. It actually feels highly stimulating because it is the most engaging thing available to you. You regain your natural motivation to do the things that actually matter.
Which perfectly transitions us into the deeper neuroscience of motivation and how dopamine fundamentally affects our willingness to engage in difficult tasks. Because the detox is just the reset button. Once you've cleared the slate and restored your receptor sensitivity, you want to use that restored focus to achieve your long-term goals. You want to engage in what Cal Newport calls deep work.
Yes, deep work. The ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task that produces real value. And there is a brilliant foundational study from the National Institutes of Health, co-led by Dr. Michael Frank at Brown University, that illuminates exactly how dopamine interacts with our willingness to do hard work. I saw the methodology in the stack, but what exactly was his experiment trying to prove?
This study is a cornerstone in understanding what we call cognitive motivation. Dr. Frank's team wanted to know if dopamine levels actively influence how the brain evaluates whether a difficult mental task is truly worth the effort required to complete it.
Okay, how did they test that?
They gathered 50 participants and used advanced imaging to measure their natural baseline dopamine levels in a specific region of the striatum called the caudate nucleus, which is deeply involved in learning, memory, and motivation.
Okay, so they know who naturally has high dopamine and who has low dopamine in that specific brain region. Then what did they make them do?
They asked the participants to choose between a series of memory tasks of varying cognitive difficulties. Some tasks were simple and required very little mental effort. Other tasks were highly complex, requiring intense focus and working memory. The catch was the financial incentive. The harder the task they chose, the more money they were offered as a reward upon completion.
So it's a direct test of effort versus reward, and the baseline results were pretty stark, right?
Very clear. The participants with naturally higher dopamine levels in the caudate nucleus were significantly more likely to focus heavily on the reward the money and choose the more difficult, cognitively demanding tasks. Their brains essentially said, the payout is huge, let's do the hard thing.
And the people with lower dopamine.
Conversely, the people with lower natural dopamine levels were much more sensitive to the perceived cost of the task. They focused on the effort, the mental strain, and the difficulty, and they overwhelmingly opted for the easier, lower-paying options.
But the part that really fascinated me was the second phase of the experiment. The researchers didn't just stop at observing the baseline. They introduced a pharmacological intervention. They gave the participants either a placebo or a drug like methylphenidate, which most people know by the brand name Ritalin, or another drug called sulpiride.
Both of which significantly increased dopamine levels in the brain.
Right. They found that artificially boosting dopamine in the subjects who previously had low dopamine entirely changed their behavioral profile. Suddenly, those individuals were highly willing to choose the more difficult mental tasks.
Yes.
So, wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. Did the Ritalin just make them smarter? Did the sudden influx of dopamine increase their raw cognitive ability or their IQ, allowing them to do the hard tasks more easily?
That is the most common assumption, but no. And that is the critical takeaway from Dr. Frank's research. By meticulously tracking the participants' eye movements and reaction times, the researchers discovered that the dopamine boost didn't necessarily alter their raw attention capacity, nor did it directly boost their underlying cognitive function or memory skill.
They weren't magically smarter?
They weren't magically smarter. What the dopamine altered was their brain's internal cost-benefit analysis.
It changed how they valued the work.
Precisely. It made them weigh the benefits of the reward much more heavily than the perceived cost of the effort. Dr. Frank noted that while people generally think medications like Ritalin simply act as focus pills that lock your attention in, what they're really doing is elevating the perceived subjective benefits of a demanding task while simultaneously reducing the perceived subjective costs of the effort. Dopamine acts on cognitive motivation, which is entirely separate from actual cognitive ability.
So, if we apply that to you, the learner, it means that your willingness to do hard things, whether that is studying for a grueling final exam, putting in the hours to build a side business, or writing a complex novel, is deeply biologically tied to the state of your dopamine system.
It's the biological foundation of drive.
If your dopamine system is healthy and sensitive, your brain looks at the hard work and says the long-term reward is worth this effort. But here's the catch, and this is where the modern world traps us. The cheap digital dopamine you get from scrolling social media does not help you achieve this state.
Not at all. It does the exact opposite.
Right. Digital dopamine gives you fleeting, unpredictable, massive spikes that, as we discussed, desensitize your receptors and leave you feeling empty. It exhausts your reward system. It's like revving a car engine in neutral. It makes a lot of noise, burns a lot of fuel, but gets you absolutely nowhere.
A great analogy.
When you then try to do deep work, your exhausted brain looks at the effort required and says, the cost is too high and the reward is too delayed. Go back to the easy digital hits.
To sustain deep work, to actually build a life of accomplishment, you need healthy, sustained dopamine release. And the sources provide a brilliant contrast to digital dopamine, the dopamine generated by rigorous physical exercise.
The exercise section of the research is so compelling. I think everyone knows working out is good for you, but the neurochemical breakdown is fascinating.
When you engage in physical activity, whether that's going for a long run, cycling, lifting weights, or swimming, you don't just get a quick, unnatural spike that instantly crashes. You trigger a sustained, robust release of dopamine, functioning alongside serotonin and endorphins. This is what creates the famous runner's high. But the benefits extend far beyond the hour you spend in the gym.
Right. Unlike the slot machine effect of social media, which downregulates your receptors, regular exercise actually increases dopamine receptor availability in the brain over time. It makes your brain more physically sensitive to the positive effects of dopamine long term.
It heals the receptors.
Furthermore, physical activity heavily promotes neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to physically form new neural connections and adapt to challenges. This healthy, balanced neurochemical state makes long-term commitments and the ability to stick with difficult cognitive tasks biologically easier. By controlling your environment, detoxing from the cheap digital hits, and actively investing in healthy physical habits, you are literally tipping the biological scales in your brain. You are changing your internal cost-benefit analysis so that hard work finally feels worth it.
So, having established the neurobiology of motivation, the dangers of desensitization, and the necessity of clearing away digital noise through a fast, the final and perhaps most crucial piece of the puzzle is maintenance.
Maintenance is huge.
The detox gets you back to baseline. But how do we ensure we don't just slide right back into our old destructive habits the Monday morning after our detox ends? How do we build resilient protocols for the future?
To answer that, we synthesize the practical strategies from two of the most prominent, actionable voices in behavioral science today, neurobiologist Dr. Andrew Huberman and habit formation expert James Clear. Let's start with Huberman's protocols from his lab's research. His first strategy blew my mind because it completely flips a psychological weapon back on itself. It's called random intermittent reward timing, or RRRT.
It is a brilliant psychological Aikido move. As we discussed at length with B.F. Skinner and the video game loops, a variable ratio schedule, the unpredictability of a reward, is incredibly addictive. Huberman suggests taking that exact mechanism that casinos use against us and applying it consciously to our own goals to build positive addiction to hard work.
Because the mistake most of us make, and I am totally guilty of this, is that we try to celebrate every single win.
Right.
Or we bribe ourselves every single time we have to do something hard. If I study for 1 hour, I get to watch an episode of my favorite show. If I finish this report, I'm going to buy a fancy coffee.
And neurologically, what happens when you do that consistently?
The reward becomes totally expected. The prediction error drops to zero. It loses its dopaminergic power to motivate you. And worse, if for some reason you don't get the coffee after the report, your dopamine actually drops below baseline, you crash, and you lose all motivation for the next task.
Precisely. Huberman says you must utilize random intermittent reward timing to protect your drive. When you succeed at a task or reach a milestone, sometimes you should absolutely celebrate it. Go eat the coffee, take the break. But other times, completely at random, you should explicitly not celebrate at all.
Keep the brain guessing.
You roll a mental dice. By keeping the external reward unpredictable, you keep your brain's dopamine system constantly engaged, guessing, and highly motivated without creating a tolerance or setting yourself up for a crash.
It's like turning yourself into your own slot machine. And he takes it a step further. He suggests trying to cognitively attach the dopamine release not to the external reward at the end, but to the effort process itself. If you can convince yourself through repetition and mindset that the friction and the struggle of the hard work is the actual reward, you have essentially hacked your motivation permanently. You become someone who loves the process.
Huberman also highlights a highly practical physiological technique developed by Dr. Emily Balcetis, a psychology professor at NYU. She calls it spotlighting. It's based on the fact that our dopamine system interacts very heavily with our visual and motor systems.
How does spotlighting actually work in practice?
She found that if you physically narrow your visual focus, literally staring at a specific narrow point, like a spot on the wall across the room, or a specific single word on your computer monitor, for a set period of time, roughly 30 to 60 seconds before you begin working, you actively recruit a neurochemical state of readiness.
Just by staring at a spot.
Yes, narrowing your visual aperture triggers a mild stress response,
Yeah.
prompting the release of epinephrine, and signals the brain to release dopamine. It physically anchors your focus and preparing your neural circuitry for a bout of deep work. It's a way of using your eyes to steer your brain chemistry.
That is a tool you can use instantly at your desk. Now, Huberman's third major warning is a protocol of what not to do. He calls it don't layer dopamine. I see this specific mistake all the time, especially in fitness culture. You see the gym bro who, before a workout, takes a massive double scoop of a stimulant-heavy pre-workout drink.
Oh, yes.
Then they put on their absolute favorite, highest energy playlist, cranked to max volume. Then they spend 20 minutes chatting and joking with their friends on the gym floor. And maybe they even take a nootropic supplement on top of it. They are stacking all these stimuli at the exact same time.
While that layered stack of stimuli will certainly motivate you to have an incredibly intense workout in the short term, you are artificially forcing an astronomical spike in dopamine. You are pulling from a finite chemical reservoir. The brain cannot possibly sustain that peak. What inevitably follows later in the day is a severe, debilitating dopamine crash.
You just feel drained.
You feel lethargic, slightly depressed, and unmotivated to do anything else. More importantly, it ruins your baseline. Your next workout without that specific massive stack of stimuli is going to feel agonizingly difficult because you've created a temporary massive tolerance.
The protocol to avoid this is to consciously vary your inputs. Don't layer them every time. Sometimes work out with your favorite music, but don't take the pre-workout. Sometimes take the caffeine, but work out in total silence to build mental fortitude. Sometimes work out with friends, sometimes work out alone. Protect your dopamine baseline by not maxing it out every single time you engage in an activity. Keep the brain guessing.
Moving from neurobiology to structural habit formation, we look at James Clear, the author of the massive bestseller Atomic Habits. His approach focuses heavily on how our brain's physical structure physically adapts to our daily routines over time. The sources discuss a biological phenomenon he explains called synaptic pruning.
The synaptic pruning concept is a great visual. I always wondered why it's so incredibly hard to break an old habit, even when you logically know it's bad for you.
Synaptic pruning explains the physical architecture of why habits form. It's a fascinating biological reality. When human babies are born, their brains are incredibly dense. They actually have about 41% more neurons than the average adult.
Yeah.
Their brains are like a dense, overgrown jungle of potential connections, ready to learn any language or adapt to any environment.
Right.
But as we age and as we repeat specific behaviors, our brains become more efficient. The neural pathways or synapses that we use repeatedly become heavily reinforced. They become thicker, faster, and stronger, like paving a dirt path into a massive concrete superhighway.
And the connections we don't use.
They are biologically pruned away by the brain to conserve metabolic energy. The jungle paths you never walk down grow over and disappear.
So if you practice playing the piano every single day for 10 years, your brain literally builds a biological superhighway for those specific musical motor neurons. It becomes effortless. If you never play the piano, those pathways are pruned. Clear argues that synaptic pruning occurs with every single habit you build, good or bad. You already have incredibly strong, deeply wired, superhighway habits that you do every day without even thinking, like turning on the coffee maker the second you walk into the kitchen in the morning, or brushing your teeth, or putting your keys in a specific bowl.
And Clear's absolute genius is showing us how to leverage that existing, heavily paved biological infrastructure to build new, positive habits, rather than relying on raw, fleeting willpower. He calls this technique habit stacking.
This is so practical. Because usually, when we want to start a new habit, we say something vague like, I'm going to start meditating at some point today, which relies entirely on you remembering to do it and finding the motivation to do it in the moment. Habit stacking uses a specific formula. After current habit, I will new habit.
You are taking the new fragile behavior and attaching it directly to the end of the robust biological superhighway of the old behavior.
Exactly. Let's build a routine for the learner right now. Let's say you want to build a habit of mindfulness and reading, but you never find the time. Your formula becomes, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, which is a hardwired habit you will never forget to do, I will immediately sit at the table and meditate for 1 minute.
Simple and direct.
Or, after I take off my work shoes at the end of the day, I will immediately put on my running shoes. You are inserting the fragile new habit directly into the biologically hardwired routine. The old habit acts as an undeniable automatic trigger for the new one.
And the power of this compounds when you chain them together into a seamless sequence. After I eat dinner, I immediately put my plate in the dishwasher. After I put my plate in the dishwasher, I immediately wipe down the kitchen counter. After I wipe the counter, I set out my coffee mug for the next morning. You completely remove the decision fatigue. The brain doesn't have to expend energy deciding what to do next. The sequence is automated.
What I love about synthesizing all of this, from Huberman's intermittent rewards to Clear's habit stacking, is that it ultimately achieves the stabilization of your entire neurochemistry. By managing your dopamine, by preventing the extreme spikes and crashes, you create mental room for what the sources call the here and now neurotransmitters.
Yes, chemicals like serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins.
Right. While dopamine is frantic, always focused on the future, always craving the next thing, always wanting more, the here and now chemicals are grounding. They allow you to feel calm, present, and deeply satisfied with the work you are actually doing in the moment. Cultivating these through mindfulness, deep work, and balanced stacked habits is the ultimate antidote to the overstimulated modern world.
So let's recap this incredibly dense journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the harsh reality of your lost focus. We established clearly that your inability to concentrate is not a personal failure or a lack of character. It is the direct result of your evolutionary neurochemistry being hijacked by a digital world optimized for compulsion loops and micro-hits of artificial dopamine.
We explored how a dopamine detox, a deliberate, structured behavioral fast from hyperstimulating activities, can help restore your brain's receptor sensitivity, lowering your baseline so that normal, meaningful tasks feel engaging again.
We learned from the NIH data how dopamine literally alters your brain's internal cost-benefit analysis when faced with hard work, proving that protecting your dopamine is essential for cognitive motivation.
And finally, we synthesized protocols like random intermittent reward timing, visual spotlighting, and habit stacking to help you build a resilient, productive architecture for your life. A life where you control your attention rather than continuously giving it away to an algorithm.
It is a profound shift in how we have to understand our own behavior.
Yeah.
And as we conclude, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought. We talked extensively about James Clear's concept of synaptic pruning, the absolute biological reality that our brains physically prune away the neural pathways we don't use while heavily reinforcing the ones we do use every single day.
A physical change in the brain?
If that is true, if our brains are constantly molding themselves based on our daily actions, what happens to an entire generation that spends its life avoiding deep thought in favor of 15-second scrolling videos? Could a lifetime of pure, uninterrupted digital overstimulation literally prune away our biological capacity for deep, independent thought permanently?
That is a chilling question to mull over. It highlights exactly why taking control of your focus isn't just a productivity hack, it is the most important thing you can do to protect your mind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, The Learner. We covered a massive amount of ground today, and I hope it changes how you look at your environment. I encourage you, right now, as this audio ends, to put down your phone, step away from the notifications, relish a moment of boredom, and then go take on the hardest, most meaningful task of your day. You have the neurobiology to conquer it. See you next time.